on this episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists.
Our model is not to change who the office is, who the hygienists are. We're not there to teach them dental hygiene. We're there to help them to expand their scope and to know what their scope is and say, hey, you're allowed to do this in this state. Why are you not? Can we talk about that? But it's to really help them again see that it's in their best interests and in the patient's best interests to understand the business of dentistry as a whole. Do not give in to this tug of war between dentists and hygienists, because that's actually going to make it worse. If we can communicate better, if we can get offices and get, the ADA to say, hey, let's push more on these third-party payers. What if we all united it on that instead of this other thing? I just think we'd be in a different place. We have to understand where they're coming from. We can't be mad at the dentist who's got to pay the bills.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists podcast, episode number 474. I'm your host, Andrew Johnston, and thank you so much for joining us today. We have another great one for you, joined today by Anjuli Avis, who has had an interesting path into the dental space. And I say the dental space because her positions have led her to, kind of bridge beyond what we think of as traditional hygiene. We cover a ton of topics. Amongst all of them, though, one key piece of conversation that I really loved was her thoughts on working up to the top of our scope, which has been a really hot button topic lately. If you're in any of the dental forums, we talk a lot about pay scale and job duties in those forums. And so you're going to want to hear what she has to say about that and working to the top of our scope. I think it's interesting because, in so many of our offices, we're asked to do very specific things. And when you look at your state's regulations of what you're allowed to do, oftentimes we're working at the very, very bottom of it. But at the same time, we're asking for top dollar. And so it's kind of just an interesting conversation that we have. And then next week, we have an episode on the dental assistant scaling. This is something that has passed. I believe it was in Illinois. It's been brought to legislation or is pending being brought to legislation or for votes in several other states, including Washington State. And so that episode was kind of a pro and con conversation between myself and Erica Flateau, where I actually, and you can gasp all you want about this, I take the pro angle and I say, yes, dental assistants should be scaling. And I try and win that argument. I mean, I can't even get through that with a straight face, but just you'll want to come and hear me flounder to the best of my abilities. It's an episode you're definitely not going to want to miss. Make sure you hit that follow button on your podcast app so it'll download automatically. All right, well, that's it for me. I'll see you on the other side of this with Anjuli Avis.
A tale of two hygienists.
Listeners, welcome to the interview portion of the podcast. Joined today by Anjuli. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. So I think let's jump into kind of your background and kind of like the things that are exciting about dentistry. We don't really have listeners, just heads up. We don't have a direction for this episode, but we're going to find one. So I'm really excited about that. So yeah, tell us what is your dental background?
Oh gosh. So that started as a teenager. My dad's best friend was a dentist. So he said, Anjuli, I know you really, really well. I think you need to be in dentistry, but specifically, I think you need to be a hygienist. He knew I didn't want to be a dentist. No offense to the dentists out there, but he just knew my personality. So I kind of started shadowing in his office, aside assisting sterile tech, assisting the hygienist, things like that. And then after that, went straight into hygiene school. That was about 20 years ago. So from there, I've always been someone who just wants to learn, but learn quickly. Patience is something I'm still working on. But, when I got out of dental hygiene school, I tried let's work in an office. Let's do the kind of the run of the mill thing, get your feet wet. but I realized I needed to learn more and I wanted to learn it all at one time. So I kind of took a gamble and I started temping. And I temped for like 10 years. So for me, it worked. I wanted to learn the technology. I wanted to learn the products. I wanted to learn PMS, the systems. And I really wanted to learn all of the ideologies because you come to find every dentist has a little bit they vary in how they want to approach things and treatment, obviously. But that helped me to figure it out, in my opinion, very quickly in a shorter period of time. And I got to build some really great relationships in the industry doing that. Really great dentists who would teach you, who would still teach you. And then from there, I kinda started feeling out what else could I do with hygiene. Never left the chair, but I wanted to do other things too. So from there, I went into operations. I had the really great privilege of working with the Yankees team dentists, and a lot of people will realize they do a lot of seminars on restorative, and I think that's where a lot of my knowledge on I feel like the psyche or the psychology of how patients think when they're in our chair, whether doesn't matter their status, but how they value what we're giving them, really got a lot from that. And then went to the DSO space for a while, doing the mentorship, coaching, and now working with consulting firm, really trying to get hygienists to think like providers and on the business side of things. So that's kind of everything in a nutshell from the beginning of 20 years to where I am now. So
What's interesting though is like what you're saying though, you take one segment of your life and that's like someone's whole entire career. It's like, damn, I'm a DSO hygienist. I've been in my DSO space my whole life. Okay,
yeah,
I do temp agency. I do that, all this stuff. Can we just dive into the temping for a little bit?
sure,
So that was a
absolutely.
little while ago, but so at the time, there probably wasn't all of these apps that we have now, right? This
Absolutely not.
post-pandemic explosion of the apps has been crazy. So what did that look like as far as like, was it like a local service and it was like old school phone call in the morning and
It was super old school. You would still be connected to some of your hygiene friends. They'd say, "Hey, my office needs coverage. Can you cover?" And a lot of it was door to door with your resume. Like, "Hey, I'm a new hygienist, but I've learned to use this program and I know how to use these x-rays. I know how to use," and then CBCT was still kind of coming out, but if you knew how to use it, it was like, "Oh, she knows how to use this. I know how to do this and that." And it was going in your radius, however far you were willing to drive, and say, "Hey, if you ever need a hygienist, I can be here. I can help." And then after a while, you're getting repeats. If you're doing the job the way that they're expecting you to do, at least you're not a train wreck. So, and they're like, "Hey, can you come back?" And then you start to hear from other dentists, that say, "Hey, my fellow dentist said that you're a temp. Can you work?" And that ultimately worked really, really well for me during that period of time, well before apps, well before websites, well before the digital age of being able to find temporary work. But it was a lot of, pounding the pavement and just putting yourself out there, really. And then you find things. Remember Craigslist?
oh yeah.
Remember Craigslist? I think I did find quite a few things on Craigslist, temp work on Craigslist back in the day. So yeah, that was
Oh
how
my
that was how I
gosh.
did it.
So now it feels like the temp hygienists make quite a bit more than your regular hygienist. Was that also true back then?
Absolutely. I mean, as a temp, when I first started, in a regular office where, they were like, "Oh, you're gonna be here 3 days a week." I think we were making, I don't know, 25, $27, somewhere in between there, $20 an hour. And then temps, you might make a little bit more, but most of the time it wasn't too much more than what the regular hygienist and the op next to you was making. It was just, "Hey, this is what we pay our hygienists. This is what we make. Are you available? Do you wanna work?" There you go. It wasn't this bidding thing that, really does exist right now.
What are your feelings on the bidding thing that's existing?
That's a hard one.
It's hard.
It's
It's a
it's a
tough
hard one.
conversation.
It's a tough conversation because if you're a hygienist who's gonna come in and say, "Look, no judgment. I'm here to offer all the services I know. I'm gonna operate at the top of my scope, or at least the very top of what this office is gonna let me do." Then I do think you're worth, we as hygienists are worth that extra, those extra dollars an hour, because we're here to help you to be flexible, to drop you into maybe a crazy situation. Maybe they're understaffed on other departments too. You don't know what you're walking into. So I do think we should pay the attitude of, hey, I'm here to work no matter what, and I'm going to help you no matter what. So that counts for something. But I don't think that we need to be rewarding behavior of, hey, you should just be happy I'm here. I think whether we're attached to an office or not permanently, our goal should be, I'm going to do the best for these patients. And yes, you have these services that you're going to allow me to do, the scope that you're going to allow me to practice at. Yes, I'm going to do all of it. And yes, it's profitable for the office, but ultimately it's best for the patients because the ball wasn't dropped because you had a temp in there that day.
How do you feel about the model? You actually kind of just alluded to it, where you're essentially paid based on your scope that you're willing to do. So, for example, if you're licensed and able to, and your state to do lasers, hey, I'm going to do lasers. I'm going to do this. You can go ahead and throw that on the schedule. I'll just do it. I'll seamlessly. But I am going to command $60 an hour as opposed to 48 or whatever. And the reason why this came up is last night I was having a conversation with a friend out of Wisconsin, and she was saying that she works a couple of days a week in an office where the other two hygienists will not do perio. And I'm not talking about won't do 6s and 7s. They won't do anything that's not a prophy. When they literally refer out to everything. She's like, I don't understand how these people even have a job and how this exists and how this is. I'm like, yeah, how many patients do you guys have there? Because that's weird. So those people should, if they're temping, they shouldn't be making the same as someone who's willing to do the whole entire scope. So what do you think about that model though, being paid on your scope?
Well, I do think that's absolutely something we should be thinking about, because again, hygiene has never been the way it had. It's reached new levels, right? We have there's a frontier, and we're getting there. We're able to do much more than we were able to do 20 years ago. But not all of us can do that depending on the state you're in. So that's something we have to take into consideration. So if you're just not allowed to do that, we have to take that off the table. It depends on where you're operating. But if you have the ability, if your state tells you you can do this, 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 and this, your scope is extended. I do think that we should be rewarded based upon that scope if we're touching it, if we're operating at the highest level. Because again, it's not about us, it's about the patients. The patients
Right.
get more, and the doctor can put them in our hands. And at the same time, they can do other things, see bigger cases. So I do think that we should be looking at that model a little bit more, because ultimately, if we're referring out, but still incurring that monetary value of that's a really high salary, then, the expectation for the office, for our doctors, you know, they've got to pay their bills too. So nobody likes to hear that. Hygienists don't like to hear that. I
I
mean,
know. Yeah.
unfortunately, but we have to be operating the top of our scope to be truly valuable. That's how I feel anyway.
I love
in the
that.
industry.
No, you're right. I think it aligns us also with, I think that when we look at the office dynamics, I think hygienists want to be thought of like a provider closer to the dentist, right? As opposed to like a dental assistant. I feel like we are elevated in that way. This would help us be viewed just like an associate doctor is viewed in very many ways. So if an associate doctor is coming on board and they're saying, hey, I'm only doing bread and butter dentistry. I don't do extractions. I don't do root canals. I don't do all these things. We're going to refer out, someone else and do that. As opposed to someone else who says, hey, I will do, third molar extractions. I will get in there. I will do molar root canal. I will do anything. That is bringing value to the practice. Everyone's going to prosper because of it. And then that associate's going to be paid more money. Like they're just going to make more money because of it. So I do like that idea. I just, again, really sure how to do it. But also right now in Washington State, I mentioned this a couple times on the podcast, but there's like that whole battle of assistant scaling. We did a whole episode on it and all this other stuff. Something like this would also help us differentiate ourselves from dental assistants who want the hourly wage, kind of flat rate, hourly, whatever. And now we're saying, hey, no, we don't necessarily want hourly. We want it based according to our scope, our skill set. I think that the dentist would look at us quite a bit differently. Absolutely. I want to ask you this though. I'm going to, sorry to kind of get on my soapbox, and now we're going to shift the questions a little bit. Temping is interesting though, because like you said, you want to go and you want to learn all of the philosophies. And I get that because I've worked with, hundreds of doctors, over my time. And a lot of them were just one day, I'd like one off, one off. But because it was like the DSO setting, we always had a similar philosophy. It baffles me sometimes that even like if you went to your education in the Northeast versus the South or versus the West Coast or versus, Creighton or whatever, Creighton, Nebraska, whatever it's called. Everyone has like, they learn it a little bit different, and that bothers me. Why can't we all have the same philosophy?
Well, I think if I think our philosophy is that we want to treat our patients, but I think when it comes to ideologies on treatment, I think you're going to look at those who are risk assessment, like super risk. Everything is about risk and how they're going to treat risk, and then you have other ones who are just going to be patch and churn and burn patch. Okay. And it's not because necessarily they're being taught differently. They're being taught the same thing in dental school as to how to fix it, why to fix it. But the reason that the ideologies beyond that are different is because, and I was having this conversation with a colleague pretty recently, is because there's no discussion of the business of dentistry. And I think that's why the ideology changes. It doesn't seem like it's connected. It doesn't seem like it should be connected. But I think when you think about dentistry as a business, then you're gonna think, "Okay, I have to do the best thing for the patient." So, it's not just gonna be churn and burn or patch dentistry versus, "Okay, this is a long-term journey I'm taking with the patient because hopefully my business is gonna be a long-term journey," right? So, if you're just doing churn and burn or patch, that's in hygiene too. I don't think you're thinking about the actual business, the whole. But we're not taught that in hygiene school. There's no intro to anything like that in dental hygiene school. You know that, right? And same in dental school. And I think that's why we're never going to have the same ideologies because you have to approach the business side at some point, and your response to that is going to change your ideology. That's what I think.
I bet you're right on that. It's because you are right. I do think that people are like they make the decisions based on a multitude of factors, but a lot of that is the business side of it. And it's kind of unfortunate because like the way I go
Well,
into, like the DSO and like talking to, the hygienist, I say, look, just do the right thing for the patient. Like
yes.
it's,
Mhm.
we're set up on a system where you do, so I'm more like a carries risk and a risk assessment kind of a
Absolutely.
hygienist. And so when we do the risk and then there's the treatment and then there's the interventions afterwards, like if you just follow that path, we're going to make a bunch of money. It's built into the system. But the fact that people like, whether it's hygienists or dentists or whoever, or assistants haven't figured out how to unlock that kind of across the board, just, it baffles me. Um, I want to shift because consulting is always I feel like there's consultants everywhere. Like everywhere you looking, like I just became a consultant.
Yeah.
Can you explain that? Like what is a consultant from a hygiene standpoint? Like what is they try and do? Because I think a lot of hygienists are actually scared of hygiene consultants.
Mhm. Well, number 1, I say ding, ding, ding. Number 1, yes, hygiene, especially hygienists, they are kind of scared of consultants. There are so many different types of consultants out there. So, the firm that I work with, they have been around 15 years, they're not new. But our goal is to not when we go in, we don't we're not here to change the things that patients know, love, and trust about them. So, I think what a lot of hygienists are fearful of when it comes to consultants is that's what they're there to do, is to change who they are, their core values. So sometimes that happens, and it has happened. We've worked with people who say that they wanted to change everything about us. Consultants can be all about the business. They can be all about the clinical side. They can be a combination of both. It can be all about workflows. There are so many different types of consultants. When you ask that question, it's a loaded question because they really are there's so many buckets for that. I can tell you on my end, coming from a consulting firm is, again, our model is not to change who the office is, who the hygienists are. We're not there to teach them dental hygiene. We're there to help them to expand their scope and to know what their scope is, absolutely, and say, "Hey, you're allowed to do this in this state. Why are you not? Can we talk about that?" But it's not to go in there and reteach them hygiene. It's to really help them again see that it's in their best interests and in the patient's best interests to understand the business of dentistry as a whole, and to teach themselves that they are providers. It's so funny you brought that up, is because if they start to see themselves the way an associate sees themselves, they get the skin in the game and they can dig their heels in. They can really utilize those skills to make more money. Yes, yeah, that's why we all show up to work. Yeah, we have to pay the bills. But really to say, am I an elite level hygienist or am I not? Same thing with dentists. So, I mean, that's a loaded question there.
It is a loaded question, but piggybacking off what you just said, though, like what do you feel like are the determining factors if you're an elite level hygienist versus non-elite? I guess is the opposite of that.
Well, again, I think the bottom line is, are you practicing at the top of your scope? Or are you asking for that? And are you having communication with your dentist and saying, "Look, I'm allowed to do this. And can we talk about how this would benefit the practice? How this would benefit you, how this would benefit me, how this would benefit the patients?" That communication. If we have this zero communication with our leadership, with our dentists, with our office managers, take the clinical end out of it. I can't consider yourself someone who is an elite level because you can't communicate what's needed. But again, then you take the clinical side of, am I doing everything possible for the patient every single time? Every single time that a patient sits in there? Am I looking at all the assessments? Like you said, risk assessment. Am I talking to them on a level of, we're past the lecture. We're past the lecture, but helping them manage risk. I think that is what we would consider an elite level hygienist, because you're optimizing hygiene and you're doing it regardless of what insurance is going to pay. So that means you found a way to connect with your patients.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I've always said it's like, hey, let's take the money aside, because I feel like hygienists push back so hard, and they're like, well, this service, isn't needed. I don't want my patient to pay for it. I'm
Mhm.
like, so that's really the problem, right? Like, so let's take insurance aside. Let's take money aside. If all of these things were free services, what would you do? And try and think it along those scenarios. And when they do that, they're like, oh yeah, no, I would do that if it didn't cost them money. Like, okay, now it's a whole different problem. If there was something in dentistry that you could change, improve,
Oh.
kind of like one of your sticklers of like, and look, we're not coming after you, big insurance company. Like I know we just meant talk about this, but because that's what I would change. Uh,
Yeah.
but if there's something that you could have a direct impact on, what do you think that would be? Like, what would your passion go for that?
Well, you already said that I couldn't talk about payers, so no.
No, I mean, they are the bugaboo, honestly, on that one. Like everyone wants to get rid of them.
I think that, not to touch too much on the hot topics of last year with certain decisions made on, class sizes and who can do hygiene, all those things. Not to touch too much on that because it is a hot topic, but
Let's touch
I
some on
think
that
I
actually.
think I what I wanna touch on is, and I think I've mentioned a little bit, is we have to make talking about the business side and not the necessarily money side, but how a dental office operates. We have to incorporate that into curriculum somehow. Somehow we need to incorporate the psychology of what patients are thinking when they sit in our chair. We have to incorporate that a little bit more in academia. And yes, there's a shortage of instructors and there's a shortage of getting that done. So perhaps then we need to make these regulations of who can be in academia, the protocols of everybody needs to have a master's degree to teach in hygiene school, but even adjuncts, it's moved to they have to have a bachelor's. But the ones I learned the most from were clinical hygienists still operating, working part-time. Some of them had to be a bachelor's and some of them had an associate's, but they were allowed to teach a certain amount of hours, and they're the ones I learned the most from. Not to take away from the directors or anything like that, but I think we have to change what we're teaching in schools because we're putting them out there and now they don't know how to talk to patients. Now they don't understand why the dentist is like, "Hey, by the way, I need your department to produce X amount of dollars so we can keep the lights on."
Yeah. No,
They're
I
like
I
deer in
like that too.
headlights. They're deer in headlights, but
Yeah.
that's what we keep pumping out, and so it's not their fault to an extent.
Mm.
We have to change that.
No, I agree. I also agree that I did learn probably the most from the adjunct faculty that come through. Because first of all, they're a lot more fun. They weren't
Yes,
so
they were
serious. They
ready
didn't
to
really care if they
party.
were gonna get fired or not. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like if they were allowed to party with us, they would
Yes.
have. I mean, they just but the tips of like you said, even like just patient communication, like, hey, this is a case that literally came to me yesterday. This is how I handled it. This is something
Mhm.
you guys can learn. And just having the real life conversations as opposed to like that sterile clinical, this is the most proper, whatever that we're doing in the hygiene programs, I think would be really good. I would love that if we could add this type of thing to the curriculum.
Mhm.
However, I don't know that we have a whole lot of qualified people to teach that curriculum and or to create that curriculum, right? Like that's the other hard part.
Although
And then, yeah, if they're going to go to, you know, faculty to student ratio craziness that
yeah,
just, we would never be able to do that, right? That
that would never be able to happen.
we're heading down the wrong path on that, I think. Yeah, that is fascinating, actually.
What I was thinking is if you think about it, we have so many other resources in the dental office. So, if this is something we were to do, again, hypothetically, we're gonna do an intro to business management or of a business, of a dental office. You don't ha doesn't have to be a hygienist. It could be a
True,
dentist. It could be an
true.
office manager if you want them to have a bachelor's. You can utilize that, and that could be one class in one semester that just gives them a taste of what they're gonna experience once they step off campus. Once they've graduated, that these are conversations that are gonna be had in their offices and not sound like this person just wants to talk about money, when the reality is we're at a point where every this is what every office is talking about it. Whether you're a DSO, whether you're a private practice, whether you're a small group, everybody has to talk about it now.
I would love the idea of like a rotations thing, and you
Mm,
go and rotate with an office manager, like you said,
there you
and
go.
you're going to learn about, all the insurance stuff, the coding. Not that we don't learn codes in the hygiene programs, but it's not really enforced. And maybe it's like sometimes we know that we put the codes in, but sometimes ours explode codes, so we don't really actually know them. And then things like narratives, like if for maybe
Mhm.
something for claims and things like that. That oh, what I write in my notes is really important after all to get things paid for. Okay, great. Like you don't get that. I didn't learn that until much later.
Oh,
And I would love like some sort of like rotations. I love when I hear about schools sending, their hygiene team out to work in dental offices, but I don't think that they do a front office rotation. I think they just do like clinical back office stuff.
I believe you're correct. I haven't seen it, I haven't heard it yet, where they're getting that aspect of dentistry, which is super
Yeah.
vital, and I think is
Yeah.
what's throwing us.
It really is. Um, you're so fascinating and interesting to me. I'm so happy that we finally met and are going to start talking more. Unfortunately, it's that time to wrap this show up. Is there a question that you wish I would have asked you that I didn't ask you?
Well, I thought you were gonna ask me how I felt about the the latest letter, going out to the ADA, but we don't need to talk about that because I don't wanna touch anybody's feelings on that, but
No, let's touch feelings. Let's wrap up with that one. For context, if you can just kind of like just don't just summarize briefly the
yeah,
letter and kind of
yeah.
what it was all about.
Well, the letter basically talked about the fact that we might be allowing, removing faculty to student ratios in the dental hygiene programs and allowing dental students, and foreign trained dentists to practice dental hygiene in the US, perhaps without state licensing. That was one of them. The other one that has to do with basically the ratios, the student faculty ratios, raising them. And I can understand why that was brought up is because they were like, well, we need to get more hygienists out there. There's a shortage. We need to get it more out. Okay. I totally get that. And the how we say the target that was put on them, after that, hygienists were like, this is, they're in uproar. And I can understand that as a hygienist. And they think the solution is, well, we do need, better benefits. Need we do need changes on that side. But I do think it's being unfortunately, now we have dentists and hygienists pitted against each other at this point. And what I want to say is we can't give in. We can't give in to this. If I could say anything to the community is do not give in to this war, this tug of war between dentists and hygienists, because that's actually going to make it worse. If we can communicate better, if we can get offices and get the ADA to say, hey, let's push more on payers, on these third party payers. What if we all united it on that instead of this other thing? I just think we'd be in a different place if we can join forces rather than we have to understand where they're coming from. We can't be mad at the dentist who's got to pay the bills. So I just think we just can't give in to this war that's before us right now.
It's very well said. Very well said. I do have one last question. What do you think is a solution for the shortage? Like, how can we get more hygienists and more dental assistants too into the profession?
So when we look at the percentage of hygienists that are looking, well, dentists, I think in like 2024, it was almost like 35% of dentists were trying to recruit. And then it's some crazy number about how many are looking to leave, right? Looking to leave dentistry. I think the way that we prevent the hygienists from wanting to leave is how we help the shortage. I mean, if they don't leave, because they're all saying, I want to leave to non-clinical, right? That's what's happening. Everybody wants to go to non-clinical. But what they don't understand is all the things your doctor is expecting of you are the same things that are going to be expected of you when you go non-clinical. Benchmarks, ROIs, all those things, right? So the shortage is fixed when hygienists understand better in a non-confrontational way, in my opinion, why it's expected of them. Then they say, that's how you help. Let's develop the hygienists that are there, give them leadership positions, help them grow, give them a growth journey so that they stay in clinical hygiene. The ones that are going to retire, we can't do it. They've been practicing 40 years. That's fine. But we're talking about the ones who are 2 years, 5 years in, and like, I'm out. I'm done. How do we keep them in clinical hygiene? So I think that the answer is, again, provide a growth journey, and that's going to be on the dentist. It's going to be on ownership to make them leaders, to give them a leadership path. And then if they do want to leave clinical hygiene, they've mastered leadership. They've mastered those things, and they've brought in a whole new wave of hygienists to take their place. But we got to keep them. We have to find ways to keep them there. And it's not just about benefits. It's not just about let's pay them more. It's, do we have skin in the game for them? Are we giving them an incentive, a production-based compensation? And are we creating leadership opportunities for them? Do we support them in that? And I think that's how we fix the shortage. But
no, I love it. Those are good solutions. And I think, hygienists, if you're listening to this and you are, let's say, one of the 2 to 4 years, just graduated and you're like, yeah, that's exactly me. Like, but my doctor doesn't have a growth path, doesn't have these things for me. I think it's also our responsibility. Our doctors want to help us, but they don't always know how to help us. I think it's our responsibility to go ahead and have that communication. Be like, hey, doc, look, this is what's going on, honestly. And just have and it shouldn't be like, hey, can we have a 30-minute meeting at 12:30 and blah, and don't make it all weird. Like, just be like real people talking to each other. I want to do more. What can that look like? Can we work on something together to figure this out for me? It doesn't have to be tied to anything monetarily even. It's just more responsibility or different responsibility or whatever you are looking for. But yeah, it's on everyone's plate to make sure that gets communicated appropriately. But man, this was a good episode. Thank you so much for being on. If someone wanted to reach out to you though, they'd like, hey, you know what? You said something that I just am not understanding what you mean. How can they find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, Anjuli Avis, or you can find me on Instagram at The Hustle Hygienist.
I love it. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. Though there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.